traditionally the right side of your brain is more creative. And so that's why left-handed people are perhaps seen as more creative individuals, because you're using the creative side of your brain. And so maybe it's a perfect storm of being dyslexic and then having that audio ability, but then also having a creative outset because of my being left-handed, I think kind of lends itself nicely to each other. My 6th year English teacher would beg to differ with you, because also being left-handed, no one teaches you how to write correctly. So when you're using a pencil, you just kind of write across your words. So again, it's all about learning.
Hi friends, welcome to the Sales Enablement Podcast. I'm your host, Andy Paul. That was Rob Johnson. Rob's the Managing Director, Europe, for Onit, a leader in the enterprise legal management space. And Rob sent me one of the more interesting pitches to be a guest on this show. He said he wasn't trying to promote anything, he just wanted to talk about the challenges people face, sellers face, when they have dyslexia, and the challenges and opportunities it presents for sellers. So in this episode, Rob shares his story about how he developed into a top sales professional and a sales leader despite the burden of having dyslexia. So we dig into why his dyslexia actually helped Rob become a super outbound caller, a cold caller. You know, he found since writing was so hard, he wanted to do anything but write and send emails. And so he really possessed this, the opposite of call reluctance. We dive into his particular strengths besides cold calling that Rob has developed as a result of his learning disability. And we talk about 5 business strengths and advantages that research has found that dyslexics have, including enhanced problem-solving skills using nonlinear thinking and visualization, as well as they tend to have a higher emotional intelligence, it's super important for sales, with enhanced ability to read people and to get people on their side. So we're going to get into this and much, much more. But before we get to Rob, I want to remind you, subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen to it. And if you subscribe, we'd certainly appreciate it if you could also give us your feedback about how we're doing in the form of a review. So thank you. All right, let's jump into it. Robert, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me, Andy. Appreciate it.
It's been my pleasure. So where have you been hiding out during the pandemic?
Good question. When the pandemic first happened, funny enough, we had moved just into a new house, which probably on reflection wasn't a great time to buy a house in London, but we did.
You mean the property values have dropped since then?
They've fluctuated, but it's the added stress, right?
Right.
True. It didn't have an office space, so I moved into a garage. That was my first office. So thank goodness for 21st century technology. I pretty much had given all of my money to the local phone network for using my phone as a hotspot. But yeah, so I spent the first kind of couple of months in a garage. Thought that, right, I can't do this forever, because loads of meetings, and obviously everyone had to have their cameras on as it was the new norm. They kept on querying why I had a cool Soho brick wall behind me, and I shattered their dreams when I told them it was a shed. so I was there for a bit, and then because the company I work for, we are predominantly focused in North America, and I look after everything outside. We're all kind of we're remote workers here, and so I took some space in our local library. So in the
local public library,
local public library, correct? Yes. So we, as I'm sure you guys know, like in the 80s and 90s, public libraries had kind of computer labs, so big spaces where people, when computers obviously were the size of cars, sort of thing, which needed lots of space. We that space in the local libraries in our, I suppose, region have been converted into office space, and so it's hot desks, and they're cheap, they're efficient. It's 24-hour access, and the proceeds go back into the community. So it's kind of a bit of a win-win, really.
And there's we can't escape this topic, is there's a COVID protocol, so you go in, you feel safe, or they limit the number of people.
Let's just say it's not the most glamorous of office space. Let's put it politely, and but it's functional, and the Wi-Fi is better than my phone hub. But yeah, so there is COVID, I suppose, protocols, and you can't stand without a mask, and we all have our English tea here as well, so I can only have so many cups without people getting a bit flinchy about me keep on going up and down. But that really is a first world problem.
Yeah, I was going to say, but now, as we record this in early November, it's after the U.S. elections, but before Thanksgiving holiday, and UK is, I think, as of Thursday this week, actually the day we're recording this, aren't they shutting down?
So we went into lockdown 2.0, as we've coined it, back end of last week. So we've been in for a week now, but as we were discussing offline, this time round the government thought it would be a good idea that children went to school still, which every parent in the land will forever kiss Boris Johnson's feet for. But
it's one way to get votes.
Whatever way kissing babies feet.
Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, it's things. I think people have become trained to it as well. So I'm sure it's the same in the US when we first had a big lockdown. Everyone was unsure of protocol, of what to do. No one went out. Everywhere was like a bit of a ghost town. People are just, I think, are a bit more trained to what they can and can't do now. And so there's still people on the streets. We've got better at things like click and collect. So local stores can still service the local, the local markets, and you can never shut a McDonald's down for love nor money, right?
You drive through, yeah.
Drive through, so they're all open. It's just retail that's taken a real hammering, kind of shopping centres and things like that, so malls. But I mean, we all find a new way to work, don't we? As humans, we are flexible and we have the ability to adapt and change. And I think that's never been seen greater as we do at the moment, especially for my generation.
Yeah, no, it's I've mentioned this before, eternally grateful that my kids are grown and out of the house and didn't have to do homeschooling with this, and didn't have two parents both trying to work and young kids at home helping them, either preschoolers as you have or kids actually in school. Yeah, crazy challenges. So yeah. All right, well let's talk about, let's get into what you had. A very interesting email you sent to me, a guest pitch, which I get all the time, but this one really caught my eye because you said, hey, you weren't trying to promote anything other than sort of surface this issue of challenges people face when they have certain condition, in your case, dyslexia, and the challenges and opportunities that presents for them as sellers. And quite honestly, we hadn't dealt with that. We've dealt with other issues recently, like mental health and sales and so on. But I thought this, and we've had one other conversation about a couple of years ago with a guest with, he had ADD and talked about how that really became his superpower. So for you, has having dyslexia, has that really become your superpower?
Ish.
Okay.
So I'm being British. Probably I really struggle with superlatives and things of that notion. So we can never.
So what would you say in place of superpower?
I'd say it gives me an advantage.
Okay,
it's probably a good thing to say. Yeah. So this actually all came around. We were on holiday, funnily enough, when you could still go do that this year. So we were in Spain, and I was listening to a couple of your podcasts when I was on the beach, and the girls were doing their thing.
Okay. First of all, I'm sorry that you're listening to my podcast. Well, you should have been on the beach enjoying your girls.
It's a bit of escapism.
Yeah.
But yes, I was having a listen, and I felt that a lot of there's lots of typical topics out there in the world around sales and working hard and being efficient, things of that notion. But people haven't really spoken about the elements of perhaps, and me coming from it from a dyslexic perspective, how that's affected my career so far. Now, in my email to you, I mentioned around there are final products of that. So you kind of have people like Richard Branson who talk around being dyslexic. But personally, I don't think it's good to have a figure of that notion in this world, but I'm probably not going to own an island anytime soon, right? So as a person to look up to and work towards, sometimes you have those ethereal figures that doesn't really do anything, almost like an Elon Musk sort of notion, right? I'm not going to start a space program anytime soon. But so I was very keen to perhaps have a bit more of a platform to talk around dyslexia and how that's affected me, certainly from a sales perspective I suppose I've been in professional career now for about 10, 12 years. So I'm 33. So I forgot how old I was the other day. So my wife very kindly reminded me instantly. But yes, and so
it's a bit early to start forgetting your age, by the way.
I know it's not a good sign. It's probably sales that's doing it to me, and the stress is
just wait till you're my age.
44. So,
yeah, 45. Yeah,
perfect. Yeah, but yeah. So it gave me the opportunity to reflect and see how my career has progressed because of who I am rather than not who I'm not.
Right.
And dyslexia is an element of that. And this all came about a long time ago when my first job out of university was actually working in real estate or a estate agency. And they really drilled into kind of cold calling. So I was doing 250 calls a day, 6 days a week.
Well, let's put a pin in that thought for a second, because let's go back and let's make sure people really understand what dyslexia is, and the challenges that it presents for any individual, let alone for sellers. So I'll let you handle that part.
Yeah, of course. So dyslexia in its fundamental state is a challenge with the written word and things on paper in a traditional sense. So I could read something and completely misinterpret what's happening within that paragraph or sentence. Again, there's more traditional things around spelling. So even to this day, I couldn't tell you the difference between there, and there. And it's really kind of really standard things like that, which again, my wife kind of takes the mick out of me for a bit for, but it's just our jest. And it's really struggling with that kind of notion on how words are structured and the language behind it, and so that. So
there's lots of sort of social cues that stem from that as well.
Yeah, there's social cues. The ability to read people sometimes is slightly challenging as well, and basically, kind of the spoken word is something that you have to get more comfortable with, and effectively, once you get comfortable with the audio part of the world rather than the written world. Dyslexic people have the ability to excel because you effectively you thrive in other areas which aren't just those kind of traditional things. And it's always been a bit of a blind spot, I believe, in education here, certainly in the UK, around how to manage people with dyslexia. The traditional model is just to give people 2 hours or an hour more.
Extra time
in an exam. But the reality is, there's a whole new process people have to do to, I suppose, educate and revise and do things in that notion. So there's kind of research into having coloured paper, different font types. So, for example, my Kindle has a dyslexic font. Okay, so there's even kind of those subtleties which help with the reading of words and things of that. So,
what does the font do?
So it's just a bit of a different shape. And so it just kind of helps the words in my brain look and feel more easier to read and absorb. So it's really weird. So kind of Times New Roman, it doesn't do anything for me, right? And but the same as Comic Sans, so that doesn't do anything for me either. But this font on my Kindle, and it's called dyslexic font, effectively shapes the words in a way that just makes them easier to kind of absorb as an individual. So it's weird, but it seems to do the trick.
And so do you notice the difference, though, using that and think back to like, oh, God, when I was in the university, I could really have used this because I'm doing all this intensive reading.
Yeah, so it was actually university that picked up on my dyslexia. So
you're how old when you were first diagnosed?
So I was, 18. So it was not something, and again, I kind of questioned my early education.
Yeah, I was going to say, what happened during those early years? You were
Yeah,
struggling.
I think people just thought I was a bit of a dunce. But but yeah, so, and my wife picked it up. So we were just dating at the time. And she was like, you should go and get tested for dyslexia because, firstly, you can get a fund or a grant from the university because you are dyslexic. So I got a free laptop and a printer, which was more of a driver than actually dyslexic at the time, right? So because I had a horrendous laptop, so that was helpful. But she was just like my wife Elise said, go and have a chat with them, and they put you through this course of different things you have to do, kind of putting shapes together and understanding different letters, and you know those psychological tests, no, isometric tests. That's it, where they replace a word in a paragraph, and you have to kind of say what word should be put back in to make the sentence make sense and things of that nature. And so I went through that, and they said, "Yep, you're dyslexic. Here's some stuff." But that was kind of it, right? You're in a separate room for when you're doing your written exams. And again, I think people even to this day don't really know what to do with us as a breed, because even when I was doing my dissertations and things like that, they just give you additional word count. Right. So there's nothing really helping me there except I can just use more words rather than having a word limit. Whereas in reality, dyslexics do pretty well when you limit our word count, because then we have a tendency to waffle. So waffle's quite an English word, but
right. No, we have it too.
Yeah. So, or rabbit on, that's what we say here. So if we can keep things concise, then you're onto a winner. And that's kind of bled out into my professional career as well.
Well, so as you were graduating from university and you had this diagnosis and you're looking at your choice of careers, was getting into sales something deliberate, or like most of us, just something that we sort of fell into?
Yeah, so actually sales came around in my second year of university. So I did a 4-year course at Bournemouth, and in the second year you can do a placement. So that was one of the attractions to it. So you could do a year in industry. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I went to work for Hasbro, the toy manufacturer.
Yeah.
It was about the time when the first Transformers film came out.
Yeah.
And obviously everyone was crazy for it, and you had all the Optimus Prime helmets and all that good stuff. But I actually went in doing marketing because, again, no one tells you about sales, particularly as a vocation, before you kind of fall into it. And then during that year, I went to this thing that was called the Christmas in July, which effectively means it's a PR event that happens in about July and August. And it's effectively displaying all the Christmas toys. So the PR come and they see all the Christmas toys for that year. And I saw a couple of the sales guys doing their thing, effectively. Not from where I was at, but a couple of competitors like Mattel were doing their thing. I went to set up the stall for Hasbro, and rather awkwardly, the sales guy I was meant to be with, so I was kind of that spotty, long-haired kid who was just supporting a sales guy, didn't turn up for some reason. And so it was kind of on me to push Hasbro's toys for that Christmas at 18. And you kind of have that sink or swim moment, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, you're definitely thrown into the deep end of the swimming pool or the sales pool at that day. Yeah,
especially when you don't know what you're doing. Mm-hmm. But I gave it lots of enthusiasm. I had about 11 coffees because I was nervous as hell. And we got through the day. And funny enough, the next day, rather sheepishly, the sales guy turned up with a bottle of Grey Goose to apologize. But I was hooked from that point. That sales was something that I wanted to do. And I had my first taste of it and was keen to go and find more of that.
Because the communication was spoken, and what you're doing was spoken as opposed to being dependent on exchanging emails and other things like a marketing job.
Exactly. So it was all about engaging people, discussions, conflict and resolution, but all kind of in person rather than email. And that kind of really spoke to me, because before, marketing and everything we were doing at university, so I was doing a degree which covered a variety of, I suppose, topics under business studies. Everything was heavy written, so it was all marketing, it was law, HR, things of that notion, but no sales, funnily enough. And that gave me the entrepreneurial bug to kind of go and push my career into sales, which then kind of moved into, once I graduated, I did okay. So as good as I could have done. So I got a 2.2, which is pretty average in the UK for a university degree.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and found a job where I could push my skills that I've kind of had a taste for in my second year of university.
And so that was your real estate job.
That was my real estate job. So that happened. And
so tell us what you were doing, what the job was, and because, I mean, you've sent me information about it and so on, is and you just mentioned before, is you're making a ton of calls every day.
Mm-hmm. So it was back in there was no technology to support. So you effectively had a big book, and then you had to call your way through pretty much kind of a private directory of people trying to get them to sell their house with the estate agent I was working with at the time. And we effectively got paid every time a house, or it's called an instruction here. It might be called something slightly different in the States, but effectively when a house goes onto the market,
a listing, they call it here.
A listing, right? Yeah. So every time you got a listing, I got a cut of just a kind of spot bonus for it. And so, like I said, I was making 250 calls a day, 6 days a week.
Without a dialer. That's the thing. Without a dialer, right? You were dialing the numbers in.
Yeah, without a dialer. Man, after kind of 6 months of doing that, I was a mean machine with a handset. You could dial numbers without even looking, and knowing the shortcut through voicemails and all that kind of good stuff. And but yeah, so that was kind of how I cut my teeth in this world, because again, it was all about speaking to people. There was no email. We were actually discouraged to use email, and that's because pretty much we were a workforce of 20-year-olds who couldn't be trusted with Outlook, even if you gave it to us. And we were just there to hammer the phones and get those listings going. So that's what my first job was, Andy.
So for you, and I think this thing that's fascinating, it was almost like the opposite of call reluctance, because this was an environment for you suddenly where this felt natural.
Yeah, it felt comfortable. So and again, it came down to two fundamentals: trying to work harder than anyone else, because that kind of gig is a pure numbers game.
Mm-hmm,
right?
Mm-hmm.
The more people you can get in front of and speak to, the more opportunity you have to kind of win a listing. And there's no negotiation around a contract that takes 6 months for a complicated piece of tech. It's literally, will you sell your house with me, yes or no? If the answer is no, thank you very much, and I'll speak to someone else. If the answer is yes, then great. So, and again, it's just that instant discussion, kind of understand their issues, try and address them within a couple of minutes and move on. So that was kind of the process.
Well, I mean, was there anything you felt from having dyslexia that you felt gave you an advantage in that situation?
I think it was just pure concern for writing an email. it boiled down to written communication. I've refused to do it. So some of my competitors, if you will, on the sales floor would write some emails and things like that. But I kind of thought, well, by the time it takes you to write an email, I could have tried to speak to 5 people, right? And so, and again, it's just one of those things. The more you do it, the more you get comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I remember making my first call to someone who kind of very politely told me to go away. And my hands were so sweaty after that, right? So, but you get used to it and you train yourself again.
Yeah.
Kind of how we were talking around, and you come, I suppose, a bit of an assassin in how to kind of deal with people and understanding how to come over their rejection straight off the bat, even if you're calling them at 7:30 at night, and things of that notion, and when to push and when not to push. And those, I think all that audio cues that perhaps are slightly heightened in me because of my dyslexia helped me read those signals quicker than perhaps some of the people that I was competing with on that floor.
Yeah, in preparation for this is doing some reading on dyslexia, and yeah, there seemed to be some consensus among the various articles I read that the sort of they didn't always label it emotional intelligence, but sort of emotional intuition, I think was one of the articles called it, is this sense that sort of ability to read people, but maybe just being a heightened sensitivity to their feelings, maybe the intonation of their voices and so on, that you can use to your advantage.
I think so. And it's interesting because I've been reading up on this type of thing more, certainly over the last couple of years, and it perhaps even ties into the fact that I'm left-handed as well. And people are querying that or raising an eyebrow. But it's because if you're left-handed, you use the right side of your brain. And if you're right-handed, you use the left side of your brain. And traditionally, the right side of your brain is more creative. And so that's why left-handed people are perhaps seen as more creative individuals, because you're using the creative side of your brain. And so maybe it's a perfect storm of being dyslexic and then having that audio ability, but then also having a creative outset because of my being left-handed. I think kind of lends itself nicely to each other. My 6th year English teacher would beg to differ with you because also being left-handed, no one teaches you how to write correctly. So when you're using a pencil, you just kind of write across your words. so it's again, it's all about learning.
Right. So what was the path then out of the real estate sales into the tech world?
It's I think the world can thank my wife, Elise, for it. So she there was only so many ways that she could tell our friends that I wasn't an estate agent. so she's like, you have to get a new job, Rob, because firstly, you can't work weekends because I want to see you. And secondly, real estate isn't the end all of it all. And so a recruiter called me up and was like, Rob, would you like to do something else? And I'd never really engaged with a recruiter before. So I was new to that, and LinkedIn was just kind of up and coming around that time. But they reached out, and I said, yes, sounds great. I'm keen to sell something a bit more complicated than what I'm doing now. And they said, would you like to sell M&A, so merger and acquisition data rooms? And I was like, what is a data room? And they said, we don't know. So I was like, that's a good start. Okay.
Right.
And at the time, I couldn't find anything on the internet about M&A data rooms, which effectively are just storage facilities for due diligence information for a transaction. And but I went to the interview. I met with a gentleman called Harry Gill, who became my first kind of proper sales manager. And he obviously liked me, saw something in me, and I was their first sales hire. Now, I'd gone from a world where, obviously, if you're dealing with 100 sales guys on a sales floor, everything's very regimented and almost military, to a place where I had freedom to do what I wanted to do. And I kind of fell back to where I cut my teeth, which was hitting the phones and not doing email. And they like that because traditionally, well, as humans and especially sales guys, we fall down or fall back to what we're comfortable with, which is not making that cold call. So that was my first job out of into tech.
And so did you have to disclose to Harry that, you're more comfortable with the spoken word versus the written word?
Yeah, so I actually, as part of my job interview, it was interesting. I made them, and this might sound a bit bizarre now, I made them do a cold call with me. So I was trying to think of a way of how I could differentiate myself.
Oh, I love that.
From the other people that would probably applying for that job as well, right? Because they would probably have other tech or SaaS sales reps applying for that job. And I'd come from real estate. I hadn't really just selling listings. So I had to try and think of somewhere I can differentiate myself. And the best way I could think of that is, let me cold call you, Harry, and the CEO at the time. I pretend you're at Goldman Sachs or big investment bank, and I'm trying to pitch you a data room. And
Even though you had no idea what it was.
No idea what it was, but you only get one shot at this, so you might as well give it a go. And so I did, and they obviously liked the. It wasn't foolproof, and hopefully there's no recording of it anywhere. But it's kind of set their expectation for what I was prepared to do for the role, and I think sometimes people get too caught up in perfection. And just trying hard and giving things a go like that in interviews shows that, I suppose, your true colours rather than trying to put the wool over people's eyes. And so that's what I did to get that job.
Well, and I think that's really fascinating, because I think that this is one of the questions that I have as you think about it, is certainly there's some not insignificant percentage of the population that has something like dyslexia or some other, what we might call, learning disabilities that present in a way that for candidates, they don't have sort of the classic academic achievement, at university, or as companies rely more and more on these assessment tests, whether they're personality assessments, and we're trying to divine where somebody has sales DNA or whatever they want to call it, is a dyslexic isn't going to test the same way, isn't going to present the same way. And yet, to your point, and again, what you read is because of the strength of the oral communications, which is not going away in sales anytime soon, is actually a great candidate, but on paper may not look like it. So this idea about how do you present yourself if you have dyslexia or ADD or something, that how do you present yourself to hiring managers?
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it? So you've got to. That's why I said to those guys, I've got to present to you some way of how I can differentiate myself from people. That kind of mindset of how I can perhaps, I suppose, have some sort of impression on an interview came from, funny enough, at Hasbro. I went for a psychometric test with those guys. So again, coming back to what we mentioned before about kind of that. What does this paragraph mean? And then if we add words and things like that, they gave me the job, but the hiring manager called me up and said, "Rob, you got the worst ever score on this test."
So he hired you in spite of yourself, is what he was saying.
They hired me in spite of myself. Now, maybe because I was the only person going for the job, but they said, that's something you need to look at, because obviously in the professional world, when you get out of this kind of bubble of your placement year, people are going to do that. And so that kind of always has stuck with me. And I've actually been to job interviews since, and I've refused to do a psychometric test because ultimately it's only going to reflect negatively on me. And so I'd rather just not do it. And if they say that's part of the process, then just accept the fact that I'm not going to get that role. So,
and you tell them why?
Yeah, you tell them why.
And they care or don't care?
I think a bit of both. Like big corporates in the world, they're very much ones and zeros, right? So huge multinational organizations, they have a hiring program. And to be honest, they don't care about if I'm Rob or not Rob. They just have to hit certain metrics in order to hire. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that's going away anytime soon. And that's why I think there's always going to be really intelligent people working for startups and growth organizations, which large corporates would always like to get involved with, but they're just going to always struggle in those entry tests. So my wife's the most intelligent person I've met, kind of standard husband and wife response. Mm-hmm.
But before you go on, she is the one that, by your own admission, that got you to pay attention to your dyslexia, right?
Absolutely.
And motivated you to get out of real estate. So kudos. What's your wife's name?
Elise.
Mm-hmm. So kudos to Elise for helping you get where you are.
Kudos to Elise, indeed. And she will more than happily take the plaudits, as she does.
Good for her.
Good for her, indeed. But so we both went for an entry exam at IBM, as the example. Mm-hmm. I didn't get close, right? Whereas she got the role, she got the job there. And but that environment would never be right for me,
right?
Because again, it's too metric driven and too heavy in that world.
But we see that coming into the startup world as well. I mean, there's this thing that I rebel against and think is such a bad idea is this idea of, in the tech world, is that everybody's basically got to be the same, right? That we've created in this company, large or small, we've created this model. We can now use our technology to compare how people do in various tasks versus other people, and we've got this idealized version of what this top salesperson looks like. And the problem is, in my mind, is that it doesn't account for the people such as yourself that bring significant strengths differently to the job than what they're accustomed to seeing.
Yeah.
And too many people get overlooked. And maybe I'm sensitive. I don't have it, but one of my first sales training class, I'm kind of introverted, and they thought I was too analytical to be good in sales. They wanted to get rid of me. I was like, well, I'm just thinking. Tell me what's wrong with that. But there doesn't seem to be room for difference, and I think this is a problem. As a manager, you're trying to hire the people who can best help you succeed.
I think that's true, but I am also perhaps a bit of a cynic. So I think organisations probably are okay with just kind of a certain level of employee. So it comes down to kind of having 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, and 5s, isn't it? You can't have a whole organisation of 1s because it would just be a nightmare. But again, you can't have an organisation full of 5s because you won't get those outliers who are going to go and hit 5 million in a year, sort of thing. But again, you need a blend of all of them, right? So you need the guys who are just going to do their 9 to 5, not query anything, just kind of happy with that because they're your steady eddies, and are just going to do the job you ask them to do without any too much stress. And then you need a couple of 1s because again they'll need heavily managing, but again they're going to kind of turn the dials with regards to the progression and growth of the business. So I think that is going to be a continuous challenge for people who have perhaps, again, dyslexia is seen as a disability, and I think that's just a classification, but have these type of things. And again, it's the same way I approached you, right? Is I tried to think of something different to perhaps discuss this message.
Which worked. Yeah, I think that, and the thing that's fascinating about it is so I was reading this article, talked about sort of the 5 key business attributes of dyslexics, and they created this acronym called DOMES, D-O-M-E-S, D standing for, as dyslexics have to learn to delegate tasks oftentimes, which to me really reads as collaboration. So more naturally collaborative. O is for oral communication, obviously quite good at expressing themselves orally. And there the last 3 I thought were fascinating, especially if you're working in any sort of complex B2B sale. Is the M stands for mental visioning, is that dyslexics have more nonlinear thinking and visualization skills. Somebody compared to like a musician who can see the notes when they're playing, which if you're dealing in a complex sales world, that's fantastic. You want that, right? Because you're doing something creative. You're thinking about things outside the box. You're not heading down the same path, and because no 2 customers are alike, that's a strength. And E we talked about was for this emotional intuition, to be able to read people better, and the S was speed, because in this article was saying that people with dyslexia tend to constantly be turning things over in their mind, right? And think about things from many angles, so they see possibilities in situations that others don't, perhaps. And if you're looking for 1s, especially if you're doing a complex enterprise sale, for instance, man, if you were to make a list of attributes you wanted, several of those would fit right on the list. Yeah,
I think there's lots of education that dyslexics should do as well, which I don't think we do as well, or don't do particularly well. But that kind of analogy really works to what I've tried to set up here, is effectively just hire the skill sets that I am rubbish at, right?
Mm-hmm.
So So Claire Banham, she leads my sales engineering effort here, and she's everything that I'm not. So I'm good at quickly building that relationship, getting an idea on where we need to go pretty quickly, but horrendous at the detail, right? And maybe that's because other elements of my dyslexic or just who I am, but because I don't write stuff down because I won't be able to understand or read it afterwards anyway. That I bring in those people who are more, I suppose, analytically driven to kind of supplement those areas which I suck at. Right? And again, again, we're all different as humans, but I think it's important for all us to go through that kind of almost self-actualization of understanding what we're good at and what we're not good at. And I've tried to always think of that as I've gone through my career so far. And again, it comes down to how I reached out to you guys because I was keen for this as an interesting subject matter, to how I went through that job interview by suggesting doing something that would set me apart even if I bombed at it.
Just the willingness to do it.
Just the willingness and openness to do it. And that funny enough, happened again when I went for my second job. So I went from M&A data rooms. And then another recruiter called me and said, hey, are you looking for another role? And I was like, not particularly, but I'm always keen to perhaps try and sell something more complicated or more expensive, kind of get a better return for my effort. And so then I went into e-discovery, which is, if you're not aware of e-discovery, it's kind of, it's if I sue you, it's the information that's becomes available in court.
So on a legal basis, because we didn't talk about it yet. It'll be in the introduction that people hear to this, but you work for a company called Onit. You've sort of been in the legal tech field for a while.
Yeah, so I've been in legal tech for 10 years now. So this was kind of my entry into legal tech was through M&A as a gateway, and then into e-discovery. But funny enough, so I was supposed to be a recruiter, and it was me versus a veteran of the industry for this job. And so interestingly, I flipped the methodology to try and get that job again differently. So I actually wrote my boss, who became my boss, I wrote him a letter. Okay.
You didn't call him. You wrote him a letter.
I didn't call him because I had an interview. We went through that process, but I thought to try and differentiate myself again, we're saying something a bit more complicated. So it's the calling is part of it. So you couldn't just sell it on the spot. Are you okay? Something going on?
Oh no, we're just real life. Sirens going by.
Things happening. Cool. So I wrote him a handwritten letter. I didn't check any of the spelling. My handwriting was horrendous, and I posted it. And the reason why I did that was I knew the other guy wouldn't. Right.
Yeah.
So again, going against that traditional dyslexic norm, so to speak, of writing something. I had to try and find a way to get in front of that hiring or the manager. And I thought the best way to do it would be to write a handwritten letter. And that's what swayed it.
Yeah, I love that. Think about that. People listening, this is, you did it by highlighting your weakness.
Yeah.
So, very counterintuitive. I love that.
You've got to, because again, the hiring market has always been competitive. It's even more competitive now. So what's the worst thing I always am a big believer in you've got to think about what's the worst thing that's going to happen. And ultimately in that scenario is you're just not going to get the job.
Right.
And so you've got to try something different. And the reality with anything that I've done is I've always tried to think of something that would differentiate rather than going through the normal process. Because any job, even today, that I've applied for, and it's the traditional model of you apply on LinkedIn, a call, and then nothing happens. That happens to people all the time, and you don't have any impact on that process. And if you don't have any impact, you're not putting across your personality. And ultimately, in sales, that's kind of what you sell on, right? Is your personality and your ability to build a relationship.
Very interesting. No, I love that story because, one of the things that, and this is sort of parallel to this, but in today's world, obviously, one of the big challenges is how do you grab people's attention? And, now we have this whole sort of gifting space that exists where people are creating, digital gifts or gift packages or something they said, physical gift packages to send to people to land on their desk and capture their attention in a way that an email or LinkedIn outreach wouldn't. But yeah, it takes some nerve to say, I'm not going to edit this handwritten note. I have dyslexia. My writing sucks. I can't help it, and the spelling's going to be horrible, but it will stand out.
It will stand out. And to be fair, the ability to write has got easier. So I am a huge advocate of Grammarly now.
Oh, yeah.
Have you come across that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yes.
So because I sell complicated stuff now, I do have to write an email every now and then.
You're selling into a profession that people are writing by definition. They're writers.
I know. I didn't choose a great one to go into being dyslexic. Being lawyers who they are, and they love the written word and all of its kind of subtle nuances, whereas that's not my game. So my process now typically is Grammarly is my first port of call, and then it probably goes to about 2 other people. So again, as you probably kind of have as I've come across, is I have no shame in asking for help. And so even though I lead our organization here, I get probably 2 other people or 3 other people in my organization to review my email and basically go slate it. Tell me what's wrong with it. I'm not going to take offense. Even if it's schoolboy errors, again, about using the wrong there or something like that.
Right.
Just it needs to be right rather than my feelings being saved. And yeah, so that's the model we work. And again, it proves a lot better than you coming across fairly poorly in an email.
Yeah. Well, fascinating. Well, hey, Robert, I'm really glad you reached out. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but if people want to, I don't know, do you have resources, people to learn about, dyslexia at all, or if somebody feels this is an issue, maybe they can reach out to you even and talk about it if they're in sales?
Yeah, of course. So I'm on LinkedIn, Robert Johnson, Onit, Managing Director. If people want to reach out, have a chat. I've spoken to quite a few people in the past about who I am, what I do. I try and help. So I'm one of the alumni at my school, and we're beginning to have a couple of conversations with them around how we can improve almost 2 things. So improve the dyslexic process they have, but also sales awareness education as well. Because I don't know if it's the same in the States, but in the UK, it's non-existent. And again, a few of us have made an okay career out of sales, right, Andy?
That sounds like you're doing quite well. And I this is the type of thing I said that animates me is that, as I said before, is it's not a path to success to try to have a team of people all like each other, and act the same way, but to find those who can have unique strengths and can play to that in the environment that we're operating in. And this is certainly an example of that. So, no, I love it. Well, good. Well, Robert, thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you so much for your time. This has been great.
Okay, friends, that was it for this episode. First of all, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen. As always, we're so grateful for your support of this show. And I want to thank my guest, Rob Johnson, for sharing his story with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to this podcast, Sales Enablement with Andy Paul, on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also leave us a rating or a review. Let us know how we're doing. We'd certainly appreciate that. And you can do that all on your phone in less than a minute as soon as this podcast is over. So thanks for your help. And thank you so much for investing your time with me today. Until next time, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone.